I live in Russia, and I'm a senior student at university. 2 years ago, I had to go to summer camp for a month and work there as a counselor. Now, the camp itself was pretty old. It was built way before the fall of the Soviet Union, and most buildings were in a deplorable condition. On my first day, I felt depressed and lonely. Although I was always surrounded by screaming kids and puzzled peers trying to figure out how to control them. There were numerous reasons for me to feel this way though. Firstly, inside of the buildings there was no connection whatsoever. The concrete walls were so thick that it was impossible for the signal to penetrate them and reach my cell phone. If I wanted to make a call, I had to go outside. It made me feel, how do I phrase it? Separated from the outside world. The camp was situated far in the woods, approximately 50 kilometers from the nearest town. Secondly, as I have already said, the buildings were old and hideous. The fat gate and almost everything inside was renovated, so that the kids could enjoy their rest. But if you paid close attention, you could see so many things rotting and dying away. Ugly concrete walls of stomach-churning color, dilapidated restrooms that looked like areas from post-apocalyptic video games about Chernobyl. The room that my partner and I shared was also in a very bad state. 2 mattresses full of dust, and just one socket with black wires peeking out, throwing a spark every time you put your mobile charger inside. You get the idea. Last but not least, just like any summer camp out there, I constantly heard stories about the ghost of some woman who wandered there during the night, making noises and frightening the kids. Everyone nicknamed her the Crone. This is what I gathered about her. Black, disheveled hair, empty eye sockets, constant expression of insufferable pain on her swelled up and wrinkled face. She wasn't tall, on the contrary. People said she was pretty short, and only dressed in a dirty white nightie, all battered and worn out. When kids heard those descriptions, and found out that there had been kids before who had seen her and called their parents and implored, sobbing, to take them home as soon as they could, it was pretty obvious that you were going to have a hard time putting them to bed, especially if it was raining. They almost went mad with fear and excitement. And when you have 40 12-year-olds under your responsibility all wired up and scared, there is very little you can do. When it was only a week before I could go home, my peers procured some booze and decided to drink the night away while the kids were asleep. I didn't feel up to it, and I refused. So I had to put the kids to sleep all by myself. Surprisingly though, I actually loved it. Everything went without a single hitch. When I made sure that everyone was peacefully asleep, I took to my room, left the door open in order to wake up if something happened, and laid out on my bed. It was 11 p.m. All of my partners were in another building on the other end of the camp, drinking and having a peachy time. Feeling rather tired, I closed my eyes, and a moment later I was asleep as well. It was pretty silent and peaceful. I woke up with a start because of a loud noise. At first, I couldn't identify the nature of the sound. It was continuous and very annoying. I looked at my clock. It was exactly 3 in the morning. My partner still wasn't there. Okay then, I said to myself. What the fuck is this? The answer hit me, and it hit me hard. It was the sound of running water, in both the boys' and the girls' restrooms. In each one there were 4 taps, and 4 stalls. It sounded like every tap opened at once, and the noise was so loud that, beyond any doubt, everyone had to have been woken up. Did the kids do this? No. This idea was put aside pretty quickly. I would hear the footsteps and chuckling, but it was silent, save for the excruciatingly loud sound of the massive water hitting flat, metal wash basins. I suddenly remembered about the Crone, and it made me feel very, very scared. I couldn't understand why. It was like every inch of my body screamed, "Don't get up. Don't go there. Let it be. The kids will close the taps themselves." And I couldn't suppress the shock. I lay like this for about 3 minutes, and then realized that they were 12 years old, and therefore probably much more scared than I was. I had to be a man, so I took my flashlight and went out into the corridor. It was so dark, and I was so scared it made me feel nauseous. Firstly, I went to the boys' restroom. On my way, I looked inside the rooms where the children slept, and to my surprise, no one had woken up. Some of them were even snoring. Was I the only one hearing this? As I approached the restroom, the angst grew stronger and stronger inside of me. But I kept telling myself that I had to be a man. It was my job. I opened the door, and yeah, I was right. I slowly approached each one and closed them. Then I had to turn back and leave, but I couldn't. I knew that she was standing there, behind me. Jesus, I was so fucking sure of it. More than I am sure of what my own name is. And I'm shivering even now as I write the words. To turn back and let the light reveal her wretched face in all its horror was beyond me. I stood like this for about 10 seconds, listening to the sound coming from the girls' restroom. Having mustered up all my courage, I turned around and was ready to scream, but there wasn't anyone. Petrified, I walked out, slowly. For some reason, moving made me feel so much more vulnerable. It felt a lot safer in my bed. When I entered the girls' restroom, I was more brave. I closed all the taps and turned back without hesitation. It was a terrible mistake. I regret it a lot. I should have hesitated. She was peeking inside from the corridor. Only half of her hideous face was visible, and there was a disgusting, malevolent smirk on her lips. It revealed 2 rows of almost black, rotten teeth. Just her head and nothing more. I only saw her for a split second. It was enough for me to inhale violently and drop my flashlight. Darkness. I crouched and groped for it helplessly. Having retrieved the damn thing, I pointed the stream of light to where her face had been. But it disappeared. I don't know why, but I rushed outside and went into a room where girls slept. I woke them up. I was just relieved to hear someone else's voice. I asked them, as a matter of fact, if they heard any noises, but they said no. I faked being reassured and stayed there for a minute or two. Made up an excuse for why I was there. Talked to them a little. It made me feel better. The rest of the night was horrible. My partner came back drunk an hour later, and even in his presence, I couldn't fall back asleep. I just can't forget her face. I can't erase it from my memory, no matter how hard I try. I believe in ghosts, and you should also, because this is what happens to us when we die. Be prepared, but bear in mind that they cannot hurt you. If she could, she definitely would have torn me apart. I could read it in her eyes. The way she looked at me. She is not material, and she cannot interact with objects. I keep telling this to myself. But then how did she open those taps? I live in a house at the top of a hill, in a woody and quiet neighborhood. Everyone mostly keeps themselves out here. It's not the neighbor community that suburbs usually have. But in all honesty, it's fine with me. Today, I'm watching my sister's kids while she's in the hospital. I'll change some names. I'll accept the name of the ghost, which somehow I feel would be a bad idea. I'm not sure why. There's always a spot on our driveway where, whenever I walk down to the mailbox or take the trash and recycling up or down the hill, I always feel like someone is watching me from the other side of the fence. I would just assume it was a neighbor, watching out of curiosity or something, since no one really talks to each other on the street. Today, I'm out here with the kids so they can run around and play. I'm pretty exhausted with having to endure the noise, and act suitably excited to meet their expectations. Apparently, I'm the fun aunt. And while that's a cool title to have, it's a lot to keep up with. We were walking up and down the driveway, on an adventure, according to my nephew, who's 3 years old, when he suddenly gasped and said, "Auntie Ruka, can we see Violin? He's a boy." I assumed he was playing, since for the last hour we had been pretending that Jake and the Neverland Pirates were on an adventure with us. So I smiled and told him, "Yeah, sure, Wesley." We got a little farther up the hill and he stopped, a huge smile spreading over his face. "Hi, Violin," he called, and walked over to the fence. The same spot where I always feel that chill of someone's eyes staring at me when I walk by. Wesley then turned to me and pointed at a spot next to the tree on the other side of the fence. There was nothing there that I could see. "That's Violin," he told me. "He's a boy. Say hi, Ruka." I looked carefully at the spot he was directing me to, and as hard as I tried to look, there was still nothing that I could see. But the feeling of being watched was very strong. I felt hair stand up on the back of my neck. I couldn't explain why, but I was sure that there was something there, staring at me. That was when I saw the shadow. The sun was behind us, casting a shadow from Wesley's and my bodies onto the driveway, as you would expect. But across the fence, there was no person standing there in the spot that I could see. There was a small shadow, stretched across the grass. I put on my best smile, for the sake of my nephew, and as cheerfully as I could I called out, "Hi, Violin." Wesley turned back to look up at me, as if waiting for me to say something else, and then looked over at the fence once more. "Oh," he said, and turned to face me. "Violin says hi back. He says he likes you, but you can't hear him." "Oh, that's too bad," I said without thinking. "I'm glad he likes me too." "Why can't you hear him?" Wesley demanded. I replied the only thing I could think of. Sometimes, only kids can hear special people. I'm not a kid anymore, so I don't get to hear him. That seemed to satisfy him, for next thing I know, he went off playing with the ghost, talking to him and pretending they are pirates looking for buried treasure. I stayed close, worried that he might try and climb the fence to get to Violin's side. But each time he asked, "Can I come over?" or "Can you come over?" he always followed it up with, "Oh, why not? Oh, okay." A few minutes later of becoming more and more unnerved, I decided it was time to take the kids inside to eat. "You guys can play another day," I said, a part of me fearful that I might upset the unseen specter. Call me superstitious, but I don't want to upset a ghost, especially one that is playing with my nephew. But at the same time, I also don't want to let the kids play with it. It's not like they're my kids, and on top of that, I know nothing about this Violin, or if he's dangerous. I asked Ida, Wesley's older sister, who's 5 years old, if she could see Violin, and she said, "Yeah, but I don't want to play with Violin. I don't like him very much." I also asked Charlotte, the youngest, who's 2 years old, and she didn't seem to really understand what I was asking. Might be too young. She didn't want to go anywhere near the fence though, and made me hold her every time we passed it. We're all inside now, and Wesley's asking if he can go back outside to play with Violin. I was making up an excuse as to why he couldn't, and then I looked up at the window that faces out towards the front porch, and there was a perfect outline of a shadow of a person. I don't know what to do. All I know is that there's no way those kids are going back outside. And I'm afraid to open the door. There's a good chance you have one in your city. The real haunted house from the 1800s that's been turned into an inn, a restaurant, or other attraction designed to take your money. Most likely, the family that lived there during the 19th century died of mysterious causes. It probably wasn't mysterious. I'll put my money on TB, or maybe even the flu. People claim they have heard and seen ghostly apparitions at these types of places. I, for one, always thought it was bullshit. That wasn't until I went to one attraction with my sister, in the small river town of Alton, Illinois. I will not give the name of the business. You may think they would like the free publicity, but after you hear what we witnessed, you will most likely not want to visit. I'm not here to tell you about spooky noises or ghosts that I saw in a house, because I didn't. But whatever is in this place was evil, and wanted to hurt my sister. The table. Right off the bat, we experienced a bizarre event. We were in a tour group of 6 total visitors. In the entrance of the home, just past the foyer, was a sign-in book, atop a large antique wooden table. This table was about 4 feet tall and 6 feet long, with a glass top. All of the other guests had signed in, and my sister stepped up to do the same. As soon as my sister had finished signing her name, the entire glass tabletop shattered in a loud crash. I'm not saying that the glass came loose, fell to the ground, and shattered. What I saw was my 110-pound sister sign her name in a book, and the second she finished, the glass instantly crumbled beneath it. The next event brought her to tears. As we were finishing a tour of the basement, we began walking up the stairs to the main level. I heard my sister scream that someone had just grabbed her foot, and she ran upstairs. When we got to the top of the stairs, we confronted the tour guide. I said something along the lines of, "Is this really the kind of place to pull a stunt like that?" The manager profusely apologized, and swore up and down that they are not the kind of place to resort to cheap scare tactics, and would absolutely never touch a guest. The most disturbing thing was that my sister was wearing sandals, and had her toenails painted the day before. The foot she claimed was grabbed was completely free of nail polish. The toes on the other foot remained painted. The hand. This next event was the last straw for my sister. Countless times throughout the tour, she complained that she felt like something was grabbing her. At one point, she looked at her arm and screamed. There were black fingerprints. She frantically wiped them off. The black residue had the consistency of soot. The staff. At this point, the staff became weird. They seemed fascinated with all the things that were happening around my sister. They kept asking her to come down to the basement and be a part of a seance. The basement was apparently where they had the most activity. They even asked the other guests to leave. Customers who had paid good money were literally asked to leave mid-tour. By this time, my sister had enough. Tears streaming down her face. She started to leave. For lack of a better word, the staff was aggressive. They were very insistent that she stay, and almost tried to get between her and the door. My brotherly instincts kicked in, and I escorted her to the door, and told her to go start the car. She left, and I turned to talk to the manager, who was a small elderly woman. I spoke to the old woman for about 30 seconds. She almost seemed desperate in asking me to please bring my lovely sister back in, but I turned and left. However, there is one detail I've never spoken of until now. The entire time that the old woman begged for me to go retrieve my sister, her eyes were rolled in the back of her head. We're never going back. On a deployment to Iraq, a buddy and I were sitting in a guard tower in the middle of nowhere, around 1 a.m. in the middle of June, and all of a sudden we hear a bunch of dogs start losing their minds. Barking, growling, howling from what seemed to be every direction. Now there are a bunch of Middle Eastern and Iraqi stories about dogs barking at night meaning that a demon is near. But we were grown men with weapons, explosives, and a radio. So we were good. Right? No. A few seconds after the dogs start going off, an enormous gust of wind comes with a temperature that feels nearly Arctic. Now our hair is standing on end. We are watching every direction with rifles drawn, and trying to reach the other towers and TOC on the radio. After numerous radio checks, and nothing in return but static, we began to really kind of freak out. I asked my buddy Weeks to go to the TOC on foot, and check in, and see what's going on. After a little bit of debate and heated discussion as to why he's the guy that needs to go, he begins to walk towards the ladder down the tower. As he reaches down to the floor to lower himself, another gust of wind comes knocking down the ladder, and completely blowing off the camo net on top of the tower. So he's hanging on the floorboard, feet dangling about 20 feet off the ground in full kit. I lunge and grab him, and finally get him up. I frantically try to raise somebody, anybody, on the radio. Finally we get a hold of our TOC, explain the situation, and get us sit tight. There's something going on with the other towers. What the fuck? So we sit tight for what seems to be hours, but probably more like minutes, when the SOG comes out in a pickup and starts talking. It turns out, nearly every other tower has experienced the same thing, and another guy that was walking from the makeshift chow shack to his cot got hit over the head by something and nearly knocked out. No one was around, and nothing was found on the ground that hit him. So now we had a platoon of grown-ass men in a combat zone, all who have earned their CIB, pretty much shaking in their boots. To this day, we still talk about it, and no one knows what it was. We asked our interpreter about Iraqi ghosts, and all he could say is, "There are ghosts here, but I cannot say his name." Naturally, this sent all of us into a fit. It was about 2007 or 2008, in Iraq, in a very small outpost. Connection to the internet wasn't that great, or reliable, so every effort we made to try and Google what it could be either failed, or only led to more stress-inducing stories and images. I still get the chills just thinking about it. So I love the paranormal, but it freaks me out at the same time. I can get super paranoid sometimes, and I feel like all eyes are on me, even when there is no one there. Now that is probably just paranoia, and most of the time it is, but there have been a few times that I have serious doubt it was just paranoia. As a kid, I was very sociable, and I made friends with everyone. I went to daycare during the day, because my parents worked long hours, and all that fun stuff. It was ran out of a lady's house, and not a facility. Anyway, I was talking to my mom the other day and she told me this story that freaked me out. One day when I was at daycare, I went up to the lady and asked her, "Do you know Miss Tracy?" The lady was confused and shook her head no. I then went off to tell her about all the stuff Miss Tracy does. I apparently said, "Miss Tracy teaches me things." At this point, the lady was curious and phoned my mom and asked her if she knew any teachers named Miss Tracy. My mom said no. Later that day, the lady heard me talking to Miss Tracy during nap time. I don't remember any of this, and it still freaks me out a bit. About a month ago, I was staying at my aunt's house, and the weirdest thing happened. I was sleeping in an attic-type room while staying there, and there are 2 windows at either side of the room. I was staying up late as usual, and I ended up just falling asleep. I had a horrid dream, and I, in return, woke up. I was a sweating mess, but the room felt really cold. The feeling of uneasiness was super strong, and it felt like multiple eyes were on me, and I felt like people were moving in around me. I was frozen in fear, and I had no idea what to do. Then as soon as everything started, it ended. The feeling dissipated, and I was no longer frozen, nor was the room cold. That night keeps haunting me, and scares me half to death. Was it just me being paranoid? I have no idea. Last one I want to share, and it's super short. It happened a few nights ago. I was lying in bed, and it was around 2 in the morning. I was on my phone scrolling through Instagram and chatting with a friend. My friend logged off, and I was left alone in a pitch dark room. I live in an end unit townhome. My room is on the end, and there are no trees outside. My room is also 3 stories up. Now I'm used to the moving house stuff, where a floorboard might pop, or the walls creak. But this noise wasn't one of those. I heard from my wall 4 distinct knocks. I was freaked out because again, I was 3 stories up, and there are no trees on that side of our house. Well, those are my freaky stories. I may love the paranormal, but it really does freak me out. When I was 8, I was really into scary movies. I just had an urge to see or experience something scary. It was during the summer that I started researching haunted sites I could visit. Then one caught my attention. Sweet Hollow Road in Long Island. There are a bunch of popular urban legends linked to the site, and all of them have to do with a creepy underpass bridge. A few of the stories speak about the violent deaths of children. One day I told my cousin and brother that we should visit Sweet Hollows. My cousin had just gotten his license, and my mom insisted on tagging along. When we were finally to the underpass, we found nothing. We didn't see anything out of the ordinary. The only scary thing that we really experienced was because of the zigzag-like road, we almost crashed into a tree. We thought the trip was a waste, but then something strange happened. The next morning, my mom swore that during the night, she felt like someone or something was watching her from under her bed. On the other hand, the rest of us had dreamt of a small boy with black hair. He was pale, and none of us could remember his face. Until this day, we still believe that whoever we saw had to be one of the many children who died at that bridge. I don't believe in ghosts. Some years ago, I was camping with a close friend of mine. He had, at that time, bought a large property in the middle of nowhere. And when I say middle of nowhere, I literally mean nowhere. The closest property was tens of miles away. The estate itself was in a pretty bad shape, all overgrown and the house roof collapsed, so we decided to camp in the open. The barn was in somewhat better shape. However, we didn't want to risk a roof falling on us in the middle of the night. The first night was quite the experience, and we stayed up the entire night looking at the stars. Spending all your life in a populated city makes you forget just how beautiful nature can be. The second night was as marvelous as the first was, but our hard work exhausted us, and we went to sleep earlier than usual. I was woken a few hours later to a strange sound outside. I assured myself it was nothing but nature, and my mind playing tricks on me. I brushed it off, and continued sleeping. Once again, my sleep was interrupted, but this time it was some weird cracking sound. I disregarded it, and convinced myself I was just too tired. Morning came, and with it, all of my fear dissipated. Sam asked if I heard any weird noises last night. He's the type of person who will always try to prank you, or scare you. So I told him I heard nothing, and disregarded anything he said. The day passed quickly, and soon, night was before us again. The great moon rose above us, and once again, my heart filled with fear. Night was creepy enough, so Sam decided to scare me even more with a story. The owner of this house died in the Civil War, and his wife, crushed by her loss, committed suicide by hanging herself. Instead of a rope, she used a wire, and the fall took her head clean off. Now she walks the property holding her head in her hands, and looking for her husband. Luckily for me, the soothing rain calmed my mind, and I fell asleep with no trouble. He did the same, I suppose, since tomorrow was our last day, and we still had some unfinished business. In the middle of the night, a horrendous shriek yanked me from the safety of my dream. I opened my eyes just in time to see Sam faint, and my eyes quickly turned to the opening of the tent. The lifeless eyes of the demented woman glared at me, her face disguised by a large, abnormal grin, coupled with an occasional rotting tooth. I screamed as well, and fear knocked me out better than any punch could. Rays of sunlight brought me to my senses. It took me a couple of minutes to regain my courage and open the tent. The sun was high in the sky, and birds sang happily. The notion of ghosts seemed foolish in the lightness of day. I don't believe in ghosts. After all, they don't leave shoe marks. Ghosts exist. I know a large portion of you will be scoffing at the notion, eager to disagree with me. Another large portion likely agree, and would be prepared to back me up. Then there is a small portion of you who are unsure of what to believe. I used to be one of you, one of the undecided, one of the, well, I can't prove nor disprove it, so I don't know, crowd. Not anymore. My acceptance of ghosts doesn't come from a visit to some old manor, or plantation or castle, supposedly riddled with the spirits of the dead. Nor does it come from some night in a house where monstrous tragedy struck. No, nothing so cliché and predictable. Nothing fueled by the desire to believe, and eagerness to witness something happening in a location rumored to have such happenings. No, it happened in my own home. My own, no more than 20-year-old home, where no one had died. It wasn't built on some cursed burial ground, nor built where an old house had been. It was simply built on an empty land that had been developed to fulfill the need for more housing. I'm the second of 3 children. I have an older sister and a younger brother. Consequently, I suffer from middle child syndrome. Constantly feeling overlooked, not appreciated, let alone ever favored. When attention is paid to me, it's usually to blame me for something I didn't do, or to compare me to my siblings. Whenever we ate out, it was always my sister or brother who decided where, if our parents asked us. Never me. Because I was also a girl, I mostly got hand-me-downs from my sister, while she and my brother got brand new things. Even when it came to Christmas, I felt like I drew the unlucky straw. Most all the money or gifts went to buying my sister a new laptop or camera, or to my brother for one of those ridiculous overpriced remote control drones, or those new high-end brand sneakers he just had to have. I think the last time I got one of the main things I wanted was before he was born. Meanwhile, my siblings got everything major that they asked for. I didn't blame them, but I was jealous. Jealous and bitter that they said nothing and simply enjoyed being spoiled. I resented my parents. Loved them, but resented them for barely acknowledging my existence. It accumulated one day when high grades of mostly A's and 1B weren't good enough because my sister got straight A's. There were even a couple of A pluses in there too. The persistent, be like your sister, and we're proud of everything she's achieved, finally got to me and I snapped. I lost track of how long I screamed at them. Years of feeling like I didn't matter finally pouring out. The prime part of the outburst was the last of it. I told them that I might as well just stop existing. since they didn't seem to care if I was here or not anyway. I locked myself up in my room after that. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have done so, given I woke up just as the sun was starting to settle in the sky. I found myself hurting again. It was morning. They hadn't even bothered to wake me up for dinner. Maybe they'd yelled once or twice, but hadn't bothered after that. It stung. They hadn't even come to check on me. Hadn't bothered to try to apologize. Just left me. I decided that was fine. If they weren't going to acknowledge how unfair they had been, so be it. But I was not going to apologize for reaching breaking point. I went about my morning routine and went down for breakfast. My dad was cooking today, with my mom sitting at the table flicking through a magazine, as my little brother chowed down on pancakes, and my sister played on her phone with one hand, and sloppily cut into her own pancakes with the other. I took my seat, and none of them so much as turned to look at me. I wasn't surprised that I was getting the silent treatment from my parents, but from my own siblings? "So are you two ignoring me as well?" I asked. No response. Not from anyone in the room. They didn't even flinch away from their activities. Well, I guess that answers that question. I looked over at my father, who was apparently not making me breakfast, since he just sat down with a bacon sandwich for himself. Apparently I was being ignored, to the point of making my own food. It wasn't as if I was incapable, but I didn't have time. School would be starting soon, and I wouldn't be ready to leave if I went around making my own breakfast. So, I ended up going hungry. It was fine. I could grab something from the cafeteria once we got to school. Or so I'd thought. We got the bus there, every day. There were 3 of us, and Dad always took the bigger car to work, and there wasn't enough room for all of us in my mom's tiny 3-door. So I was surprised when I heard calling for us to leave. I was in the middle of packing my books for the day, when I heard the front door shut. Confused, I went to the window to see her getting into the car with my sister and brother. I ran down the stairs, but it was too late to catch them. She'd pulled out of the drive and down the road. Ignoring me at breakfast was one thing, but driving my siblings to school and leaving me was quite another. What made it worse was that the bus was leaving at the exact same time, so I couldn't even catch the bus. No doubt, I'd be yelled at for missing school. I tried calling my mom but got no answer, unsurprisingly since she was driving. I tried the same with my sister, and again, no answer. I even tried calling my dad, and he eventually answered, but it was like they were playing a sick joke on me. Even as I spoke, told him it was me. Again, he repeated the greeting, and asked who the hell was there. I could feel tears stinging in my eyes. This prank was going too far. I got it. They were pretending I didn't exist, but it wasn't funny. He gave me some choice words before hanging up, and I found myself sobbing on my bedroom floor. Things got progressively worse after that. I discovered they weren't pretending because it wasn't just them. My little brother's friends who came over for dinner couldn't see me. Neighbors couldn't either. My family never came into my room, never even looked in when the door was open, and I was screaming and jumping around, trying to get their attention. It was like it didn't register in their minds that I was there. They can sense me when I'm out of my room. My actions have an impact. My mom wanted to know who drank the last of the milk. I answered, but of course, I was unheard. My little brother got the blame. I'd be lying if I said I didn't secretly enjoy that. If I slammed the door, it was passed off as a draft. Food going missing became something they all blamed each other for, but never me. No, I wasn't there. I didn't exist. Invisible to my family, like I had never been there at all. Ghosts are real. They're just not the spirits of the dead. They're the forgotten.